It might be time to look forward to the offseason as the Indianapolis Colts lose at home to the Pittsburgh Steelers on Monday Night Football tonight by a score of 24-17. And now their playoff hopes are dwindling as they sit with a record of 4-7-1. We'll talk all about it right now on this episode of Locked On Colts. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all, sad Colts fans, for tuning in and making us your it is going to be the first listen of the day, probably, because it is very early in the morning. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is Jake Arthur alongside Zach Hicks, and you know the two of us from horseshoehuddle.com. Let's hope the Lucas Oil Stadium internet holds up better for me than my home internet did earlier during our pregame show, if you guys didn't catch that. Today, we're obviously going to talk all about the Colts' 24-17 loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers at home here at Lucas Oil Stadium. It drops them to 4-7-1 on the season. Now, the AFC is not stacked. There's a big logjam in the middle, but you've got to think with the teams they're behind now and just their resume, it's not good. You've got to hope the postseason is the last thought. There's the back burner, and then there's the back of the oven when you take it out, when you move. Like,
you guys had the audacity to call me negative earlier today. Look, I'm
spicy Zach.
I'm just look. I just a couple of weeks ago, or like earlier last week, I think is what it was. I listed the teams that the Colts had left, and that they basically had to win all but one. They could maybe lose one game if they wanted to make the playoffs. And then it's the Cowboys, the Vikings, the Chargers, the Giants, and then there the Steelers and the Texans. And I was like, look, the Colts are in the same category as the Texans and the Steelers. And I had a lot of pushback from that. Like, oh, they're much better than the Steelers. They're much better than the Texans. No, they're not. They're not. They are on the same playing field as these teams. We saw that tonight. I mean, the Steelers came out, punched them in the mouth early. The Colts were able to bounce back. And then we, in the second half, we kind of saw the battle of two bad teams kind of going at it, with the Steelers getting the offsides on the field goal kick and then the pass interference in the end zone, which gave the Colts ample time to score on the 1 yard line going in, and they fumbled it right back to the Steelers. I mean, that right there is the epitome of both those teams. Like, that was just the perfect analysis, right? The perfect visual of what these two teams have been this season. So, look, the Colts, there's no team in the league that we can say, oh, no, the Colts are better than them. Don't worry. Like, no, they are on that level with the bottom feeders, with the Steelers. I mean, look, the Las Vegas Raiders 2 weeks ago, they, it came down to 10 yards away from the Raiders scoring to win that game. The Houston Texans, the current worst team in football, it was a tie game in week 1 against them. So look, the Colts, there is no clear team that the Colts are definitely better than. They are in that bottom tier. And next week when they play the Dallas Cowboys in primetime, and they likely lose that game, they will probably I think they'll jump up to 8th or 9th in draft order. So we'll finally start seeing that reflected in the draft setting, in the draft standings. But look, we have a lot to talk about this game, positive and negative. But at the end of the day, the Colts are a 4-7-1 team. They lost at home to a 4-7 team. I mean, I think that's the best way to describe it. This team is the same team they were in week 1 when they tied the Texans, in week 2 when they got blown out by the Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, nothing changed from going to Frank Reich to Jeff Saturday. It's the same issues, the same team, bad offense, defense just couldn't hold on. It's the same team. It's the same team. I'm glad that we can finally move past this. Jeff Saturday's got this team playing at a different level because, look, it's the exact same team.
Yeah, and you had mentioned around the Raiders game that whenever there's an interim head coach, the head coach is fired and then the interim comes in, there's that jolt of lightning at first, and then, everything meets its level of water, basically. And so the Colts are kind of back to where they have been throughout most of the season. My first bullet point here, because I didn't feel like being very eloquent, it says this offense sucks. And it just does. Through the first 22 minutes of the game, they had 6 yards of offense on 6 plays, which meant they couldn't sustain any drives. And they were completely unproductive on those drives. They wound up, punting. They had a blocked kick. They had 2 turnovers. They turned the ball over on downs on the final drive. You had briefly mentioned there, even when they were trying to be productive, things would kind of backfire. I described it in my post-game piece as they were dragged kicking and screaming to score points. On one touchdown drive, Jelani Woods has that non-catch / fumble. He gets a DPI call, and then Jonathan Taylor fumbles it. They just – everything, they were just fighting themselves every step of the way just to do anything positive. It was not fun. It was not fun. There are a couple bright spots to get to. We'll get to that, but the overriding theme of the day was obviously the offense again did not pull its weight, and then the other side of the ball wasn't all that great to write home about either.
Yeah, while we're just doing overall themes here in this first segment, look, I think the biggest takeaway from this is Jim Irsay did an interview talking about Nick Sirianni earlier this week, where Nick Sirianni was very passionate, saying, this Eagles win was for Frank Reich and stuff like that, because it did Frank Reich dirty and they humiliated Frank Reich, which they did. No matter what you thought about Frank Reich, he should not have been an in-season firing. It never should have gone down that way. It never should have gone down the way it did. Frank Reich should have been fired at the end of the season, but it shouldn't have been an in-season fire. But just going past that, Jim Irsay had a comment or a quote, I think it was either Indy Star or The Athletic, where he said, look, we turned the corner. We beat the Raiders and we took the likely NFC champions or something like that to the wire, and they have one of the better quarterbacks in football. Tonight was the game where we can look at it and say, look, they have not turned the corner. This is the same exact team. They might be a little different. They might lose in different ways. They might play a little bit different, but this is the same team. They will put up decent fights every now and then. They will take the Eagles to the wire. They will beat the Kansas City Chiefs, but they can't get it done. They will lose games to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They'll get blown out by the Jacksonville Jaguars. They'll get dominated twice by the Tennessee Titans. It's just the exact same football team. And again, when you're at the point where you feel like you have to make an in-season head coaching change, there's much more at issue than just the coach. There's issues top to bottom, from roster construction to players on the roster to coaching around that head coach. So if you ever feel like you're at that point, you have a much bigger issue than just that head coach. And we're seeing, again, just making that interim head coach change doesn't change anything. And like Nomadic Brian's here saying in the comments for all you guys that are listening on audio, it really is time to hit that reset switch. I think they need a new GM after the season. Probably need a new head coach after the season, even though I don't think Jeff Saturday is doing too horrible in a really difficult situation. And they absolutely need a new quarterback. They need to finally go young. The next quarterback is past my age, then we have a serious problem here. They should not be older than 25. And I'm going to give the grace of 25 just because this is an old quarterback class because of the COVID stuff. But they need to reset really big on major areas. And honestly, Nomadic Brian here is only listing a couple of the areas they need to reset. This Colts roster just needs kind of a harsh reset in a lot of areas. And hopefully they can find the right people for it. But look, again, if anyone thought Jeff Saturday was going to come in, right the ship, and bring this team to the playoffs, tonight was that firm statement where, no, it's not happening. They are done.
Getting some naughty spam comments there for a second. Also, while you were talking, you'll be happy to know I got a phone call on the press box phone here again.
Would you mute it this time or something? You usually get it. It's usually going loud.
I was on. Yeah, I kept myself on mute.
Okay.
No, this was kind of just a total failure overall today. The defense gave up 170 yards rushing, which was weird because it turned out pretty much everyone who came in there was a little productive because no one had more than 60. And then the rest of the guys all had 33, 32 yards. But overall, it was 170 yards. So just kind of a rough day overall. And I wanted to just say something real quick about the roster construction since you touched on it. it's interesting that all the areas the Colts wanted to build themselves around, if they weren't going to have an elite quarterback, we're going to have a well-rounded group, and, we're going to be great in the trenches. We're going to have this and that. Their offensive line had like one or two good games. Their pass rush has been it's been MIA a lot of the time. Like, there's been several times where they get sacks, but then they go quarters and quarters at a time, sometimes a game at a time, without really sniffing the quarterback. Like, Pickett wasn't pressured much after the first quarter, it seemed like. So all those areas where they sacrificed going for the quarterback in order to build up those pillars have crumbled. They were maybe good at one point, but they're not anymore. So that's I think you're right. The big reset button probably needs to get hit. It's just time to look at everything after the season. So with that said, we'll go ahead and start looking at this game at a more molecular level. We'll move on to the offense here in a minute. But today we're going to tell you about our sponsor, Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and now Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. There it is, you hear it. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find an affordable economy car if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. All right, so per usual, we always look at each position group throughout the game. Offensively, I think it's pretty clear that Matt Ryan is just like, I think it was evident early on. Yeah, it was evident early on in the season that he wasn't going to be it for this team, given what was around him. And now, man, like, he could not look more like a shell of himself. He won't pass the ball downfield. He finally did, like, once or twice later in the game, but like, where was it throughout the game? Everything is a dink and dunk. There's a lot of poor decisions. The accuracy is barely there anymore. The timing isn't there anymore. He doesn't seem to be able to see clear blitz giveaways like pre-snap, which, he's a 15-year veteran. Where's that coming from? So, yeah, rough going from the veteran tonight.
Yeah, I think Matt Ryan, he has enough, I don't want to say talent or skill, but he has enough savvy to still be effective at times. We saw moments in this game where, like, oh yeah, Matt Ryan looked fine. I think he did a really good job having really shallow depth in the pocket because his guards in center were blocking pretty well. And then he was kind of helping his tackles by keeping shallow depth in the pocket. He was getting the ball out fast at times, got the ball. Jelani Woods, his best playmaker in this game, which we'll talk about here in a second. So he did do some good things. But again, like you said, the accuracy is not there this year. The arm strength is just plummeted. I mean, from just game one to now, the arm strength looks like night and day. Like, I remember watching those Sam Ehlinger games being like, oh, wow, like, Ellinger's arm pops. And Ellinger's arm will never pop in any other scenario. Like, Sam Ehlinger's arm is below average, and his was popping compared to Matt Ryan's. And yeah, it's just the things like anticipation doesn't look like it's there. He doesn't look comfortable, getting a lot of happy feet under pressure. And then obviously, again, being at his age and being at his stage in the career, he's not going to make things happen with his legs. Yes, he had the scramble. I know he's had a couple of nice scrambles this year, but we're talking about mobility within structure and kind of right around that structure and keeping plays alive with his feet. That's just not who he is, and that's what a younger quarterback would bring. Like we saw with Kenny Pickett today, where Kenny Pickett was able to get outside the pocket and get the ball out and make some plays outside of structure. But yeah, man, Matt Ryan, we kind of knew from the Jacksonville game that this wasn't going to work out. And it's just been really ugly. And yeah, he's a shell of himself, just confidence wise and physically. So I hope he hangs it up after the season, not just for the salary cap relief that the Colts could get, but just because, like, I don't know what his future could really hold in the NFL from here, because he looks like he's at the very end.
Yeah, I heard someone describe it pretty well here, actually, after the game. They mentioned his arm just has, like, no flexibility anymore. He, like, pushes it now. It's almost like a shot put like Phillip Rivers had. There's, like, not much bend to it. It's just a push. I didn't really
Right.
notice it or have someone put in that context before, but now I definitely see it. So, yeah. I'd have to agree. We both thought he still physically had it coming into the season, but it's pretty clear he doesn't. Moving on to running back, Jonathan Taylor put it on the dirt for the 4th time this year. I mean, he's a productive runner still, yes, but like after a couple years of playing pretty clean ball with his ball security, his college issues are coming back with the fumbling. It was officially credited to Matt Ryan, but just looking from the replay, it looked like Taylor it didn't hit him in the hands right, and he dropped it. So that's an issue in its own, because like Matt Ryan, like his turnover numbers have dipped, but now Jonathan Taylor's are coming up.
Yeah, like it's very indicative of this season for the Colts. It's just again a perfect picture of what this Colts team has been this year. Where Jonathan Taylor still looked really good today. Like he looked good for the most part, but a costly fumble yet again, just like in the Eagles game, just like in I think it was the first Titans game. He had that fumble as well. It's just very indicative of this Colts season. You can have your star player playing like a star for most of the game, but he'll make a horrible mistake, which he's done a lot this year, which is so uncharacteristic. So, just kind of this Colts team. I don't really have much more to say about that.
What was fun though? So we said coming into the game, tight ends could have a big performance, and no Kylan Granson. That was a bummer. Jelani Woods, career highs with 8 catches and 98 yards today. I mean, he did have a couple issues. He had that drop fumble out of bounds early on that one drive, and then he had a drop earlier in the game as well. But he came alive. Like after those mistakes, he just said, okay, I'm obviously done with that. He drew a defensive pass interference call. Like he turned it up after those mistakes. And I wrote in my post-game piece again, I was like, okay, it's definitely time to make him like a permanent, consistent fixture in the offense, because he's clearly one of your best players on offense right now.
Yeah, no, we talked about it in the pregame. Remember I asked in a little time filler there at the very end of the show. I was like, hey, Jake, who do you want to see have a big game? And then I was like, oh, yeah, I also would have gone Jelani Woods, but I'll go with someone else here. But yeah, no, Jelani Woods, it was kind of what we needed to see. He missed the last couple of weeks with that injury, and he was kind of flashing before this. But yeah, this was the Jelani Woods game. He looked awesome. He was definitely one of the biggest bright spots and probably the team MVP of this game, if you could actually pick one in a loss. But it's one of the best things that we could see. And yeah, like Piff says here, that we use them so much. No, we could have used them all year. Yep. That's kind of what it is. But it says it pissed him off that we used Woods so much tonight because we could have used him all year. He said that in a little more vulgar terms, but I have to, censor it a little bit. But sometimes rookies take a little bit to develop, but there definitely were more opportunities that could have got him on the field earlier this season. So hopefully these last 5 games, even if we're getting smacked, some good teams, we can get the ball to Jelani Woods and build that confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's man. And it was very evident that when Granson gets back as well, you're good.
You're good.
We want your passion.
Loyal listener.
Right. It's very evident when Granson gets back as well. Like these two should absolutely be used and be big parts of the game plan. Like Mo Alley-Cox, this was a good opportunity for him to be used a lot, and he had just a couple catches. That's what he is now. He's going to be a little security blanket outlet guy. Like I just think that's what it's going to be, and that's fine because they now have a couple decent pass catching options.
Yeah. The other bright spot I want to say about this game is I was kind of pleasantly surprised with the offensive line for the most part. Like they were blocking well in the run game. Bernhard Raimann did well until that last drive. And that's kind of what the Eagles game was for him too. Is until the Colts had to throw the ball, Bernhard Raimann was fine. But the right side of the offensive line was awesome in this game. I thought Will Fries bounced back so well in this game. I didn't see any pressures just on the TV view from watching the game. I didn't see any big mistakes from him. Obviously, he got pushed back a couple of times, but for the most part, I thought Will Fries really bounced back after a tough Eagles game the week before. And then Braden Smith versus TJ Watt. Like that was a great performance from him. Yes, Matt Ryan helped by keeping the pocket very shallow and kind of stepping up, but Braden Smith versus TJ Watt, I think this is the first time they faced off against each other. He had a really, really strong game against TJ Watt. So, if Will Fries can keep kind of bouncing back and kind of keep playing really well, take that off the need list for next year, that'd be great, because left tackle definitely looks like it's going to be a need, because that's a big one right there.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, shoot, I think that's all I got on the offense. I don't think there was much more noteworthy in that department.
Yep. Coming up, we're going to talk about the Colts defense and how the one shining unit has finally started to crack. It's unfortunate, but don't worry, guys. We're going to talk about that all here in a second. But first, today's show is also brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're all going to love. Find Block Forever now wherever you get your podcast. Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. He gives football fans an insider's look at the game through the eyes of the greatest players and personalities of all time. You'll hear Christian McCaffrey talk about his love-hate relationship with fantasy football, don't we all, and Juju Smith-Schuster give his most honest opinions on other players and positions in the league. Catch the full Block Forever series, available wherever you get your podcasts. Available everywhere now. Audible. Get in the game. All right, Jake. So this Colts defense has been the bright spot all season. They've been doing a great job all year keeping the Colts in games. And honestly, because of their play, the Colts have been able to steal a couple games that they had no right winning. They had no right winning the Chiefs game, but they did because of their defense. They had no right winning that Broncos game, but they did because of their defense. This defense has kept them in a lot of games, and it has kind of helped this record be what it is. Help this record be higher than what it is, or better than what it is. But this is finally, I think, the time we saw the crack in the armor, against a poor offense, a rookie quarterback who has been struggling, and they just looked overwhelmed all game. Like, yes, they had a couple good moments. They forced some 3-and-outs, but yeah, for the most part, Kenny Pickett in the Steelers offense was able to go up and down the field on them with ease. And I just think they're just worn out, man. They all looked worn out. They were missing a lot of tackles, very sloppy. They were getting run over in the run game. I just think when I'm looking at this defense, I think that they just are losing their legs, and I think eventually it was going to happen. But yeah, they're kind of losing that magic that they had, because they're just getting run over right now.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. They're spending a ton of time on the field right now.
All year they spend a lot of time on the field.
Exactly.
All year. Yeah.
For sure. And it's obviously got to be wearing them down. And look at the defensive line. They came into it with 3 of the 4 starters either questionable or out. And Grover Stewart wasn't on the final depth chart, but I'm pretty sure he missed a little bit of time, at least the last couple weeks. So they're all banged up right now. Zaire Franklin has been sick. Like, the defense is just worn down. Like, I'd love to go back and see the amount of 3 and 4 play. Just the amount of short drives and the amount of time the defense has spent on the field. Like, they've got to be absolutely worn out by now. And like you said, it was gonna happen. Like, how long can you keep up an excellent standard of play while the other half of your team is just not helping you whatsoever? And I don't think it'll happen to the Colts, but a good encapsulation of that is a clip that's been making the rounds the last couple of days, is that that Broncos defensive lineman just going off on Russell Wilson on the sideline. Like, at some point, you just got to get tired of it, man.
Yeah,
I feel bad for him, because there's been guys who have played like Pro Bowlers this year: DeForest Buckner, Grover Stewart, Stephon Gilmore. These guys have been awesome. Rodney McLeod has been a great free agent addition. Isaiah Rodgers has played lights out. Bobby Okereke, they're getting terrific return on investments and better play than expected from so many of these defenders, and it's been totally wasted this year. So I would be so over it too.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the 2019 Colts, where I think this defense is a lot better than the 2019 Colts defense. But I remember vaguely that the 2019 Colts defense, up until week 12, I think, or week 13, was a top 10 to 12-ish defense in the league. They were holding teams down. Remember, the Colts had that really strong start that season with Jacoby Brissett. And then when the playoff hope started going away and the team kind of started going downhill, we saw that New Orleans Saints just massacre late in the season. We saw, I think the Jaguars in week 18 in Jacksonville put up like 38 on them or something like that. They just really fell off. And I think by the end of the season, they were like 22nd overall in defense because they just fell off a cliff because they were so banged up and they were just so worn down because they had an offense that just couldn't score on the other side. Now, again, I do think that this defense is better. Like Jaron is saying here, the defense plays hard, but they need more turnovers. Yes, they definitely need more turnovers. That is 100% something they need. And again, I think a lot of what hurts turnovers is they keep playing against these teams where once these teams score 16, 17, 20 or whatever, they don't have to be aggressive. They don't have to throw the ball down the field. They don't have to take chances because the Colts offense is not going to score that many points. So we've seen a lot of opportunities and we've seen, games this year where look at the Broncos game. The Broncos kept having to try to score on this Colts defense and they got multiple picks. Yes, Russell Wilson is having a bad year, but that's one example. Another one was the Chiefs game. The Chiefs had to go down and try to score late to tie that game up. Stephon Gilmore gets a breakup and you get that interception. They've had good moments. They've had big plays happen when other teams have had to throw the ball on them, but they've had a lot of games this year where because the Colts offense is so inept, this Colts defense really hasn't had many chances to make their mark, or when they are having their chances to get a big stop, they've already been on the field for 40 minutes of game time, because the Colts offense is barely out there because they're getting 3 and outs or they're turning the ball over and giving short fields back to this defense. So yes, I don't think this defense is infallible. I don't think this is a top 5 defense by any means. I've said that all year on here, but I do think they're like a fringe top 10 unit with an offense that is terrible on the other side. So they've had to really carry the weight of this team all season. And eventually that straw is going to break the camel's back. And that's kind of, I think, what we're going to see these next couple weeks because, yes, this might have just been one bad game, but they got a big game against the Dallas Cowboys coming up. And then I think they have the bye, and then they have the Minnesota Vikings, which is another really good offense with Justin Jefferson. And then they have the Chargers with Justin Herbert. Man, it's going to be tough for this defense to maintain their play. And I do think we are kind of seeing the crack in the armor, the Achilles heel a little bit with this defense because you just can't carry that weight all season.
Yeah, and you made a good point. I think teams know how to attack the Colts as well. There's been plenty of examples of what you can do to the Colts defense to counter those turnovers. A lot of the quick strike stuff works pretty well. But shoot, yeah. Someone in the comments brought up a really good point, and I can't recall if we heard an answer from Jeff Saturday or not. And it's almost impossible for me to get down there when he's talking. But Isaiah Rodgers left the game. There was no injury update announced here in the press box, and they announced many other injuries after his. So I'm not really sure what happened. Obviously, Dallas Flowers took over as the kickoff returner. Tony Brown went down there, came in as a cornerback. So not really sure. Did they announce anything on the broadcast about Rodgers?
I didn't see anything at all. So I'm not too sure.
That'll be interesting. I don't think Jeff Saturday's mentioned it tonight. They usually talk about injuries at the top. So that'll have to be asked tomorrow during the conference call. So that's pretty interesting.
There were a lot of other things to talk about. Like one thing we haven't even touched on in this show is that clock management at the very end of that game. Yeah.
The answer that came from that was nonsensical.
Yeah. we won't talk about this too much because I don't think they were going to win that game regardless, even if they managed the clock well. I didn't think that offense had it in them to get that, but that was terrible clock management. Just atrocious. I mean, Matt Ryan slides down. It's 3rd and 1. With 59 seconds left, you call that timeout. You can actually think up your next play and draw up your next play. And then you have 2 timeouts in 59 seconds from the 20 and a 3rd and 1. Instead, they hurry up to the ball. Then they still take 20 seconds to snap it or whatever. Then they hand it off and get stuffed for a 1-yard loss. And then you're looking at, 4th and 2, 4th and 3 with no time left. Just atrocious clock management. But what do you expect? You have an ESPN analyst as your head coach. You have Parks Frazier, an assistant QB coach, as your play caller. You have a terrified veteran quarterback back there. we kind of could. I mean, it's kind of foreseeable that this was going to be something that we would run into. But yeah, that was terrible clock management. Like that was so bad. And it's not even a big takeaway for us because there's so many more things to talk about for us. But if this were a game where the Colts needed to win this game to make the playoffs or something like that, then yeah, that would be a huge talking point because that was just terrible clock management.
Oh yeah, and then for me, I hated the result on fourth down. Throwing into double coverage to your smallest receiver on the field at the time. Now, I'm sure Ryan was looking for DPI, but that's so risky to bank on a fourth down.
So I'm going to interrupt you. I know our buddy with his wife listening is going to laugh again that I mentioned this, but no, it was a rub route where Paris Campbell had his guy beat up the sideline. If you have a competent quarterback with any kind of arm, you just throw that into the end zone and hope that your speedster can run under it. But Matt Ryan just doesn't. He's scared in the pocket, and he tried to throw a back shoulder that was far too inside, and it was a breakup. And yeah, they were all begging for a pass interference. Like, no, I hate pass interference that bails out a horrible throw, and that was a horrible throw. So yeah, no, it should have been thrown to the end zone. It actually wasn't a horrible play design if you were going for the knockout punch. I mean, with all the time they had left, they probably had to go for that. It's just a bad throw. It's a bad throw, bad protection, and that was the result. I mean, again, perfect picture of what the 2022 Colts are.
Yeah. What can you say? What can you say? Well, I mean, do you have any other nice little talking points on this one, or should we put it to bed?
I think we should put it to bed. I think we've got to put me to bed here. I got to be up in a couple hours. It's Cyber Monday week at my day job, so yeah, I got to be up in 5 hours? Yeah, I got to be awake in 5 hours. So yeah, let's put me to bed, Jake.
Right on. So the good. Jelani Woods, Yannick Ngakoue had a couple sacks, and he's on a great pace right now. He's starting to wake up a little bit. But otherwise, that is it for us. Stick with us throughout the week as we put a bow on this one. We'll look forward to Week 13 in Texas against the Dallas Cowboys. Our next show is actually going to be all about you guys, so please send us your questions, your Colts-related questions, and we'll tackle probably the three biggest topics that we get throughout that. Send those on Twitter to @LockedOnColts, and we'll take a look at those over the next day or so.
Yeah, but make sure you guys are following us on social media @LockedOnColts, @JakeArthurNFL, and @ZachHicks2 on Twitter. That's where you can send your questions that you want answered for Tuesday's episode. We're going to try to make that more of a mailbag stuff. So we'll pick the three biggest topics that you guys send us and kind of go from there. And also subscribe to the Locked On Colts channel on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. We have a lot more bonus content coming your guys' way. And I'm going to kind of focus a lot of that bonus content on Saturdays to be more NFL draft focused because it is officially NFL draft season here for the Indianapolis Colts. So make sure you guys are checking out for that. We'd also love your guys' ratings and reviews, only if they're nice though. So please keep them nice. And thank you guys for making us your first listen very, very early in the morning. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow.